Cheap Tickets wants to thank you for defending our country all over the world. Cheap Tickets wants to help you take a trip of your own. We believe the best trips in life are cheap. And as a proud supporter of the U.S. military, they want to offer you flights, hotels, car rentals, and even event tickets for less because you deserve it. Visit cheaptickets.com/military and take 18% off hotels. Offer is valid for active duty service members, veterans, military reserves, and the National Guard. Cheap Tickets thanks you for your service. cheaptickets.com/military. Now more than ever, you need reliable news you can count on. Since 1861, Stars and Stripes has been committed to bringing you the news without the spin. We believe in the First Amendment, and we're damn proud to have been there alongside you wherever you were deployed, keeping you connected. Today, we're only a click away. Go to stripes.com, use promo code podcast, and get 50% off your subscription. 50% off. There are some folks out there that think Stars and Stripes is a little old-fashioned. Well, folks, maybe right now, we need a little old-fashioned. Go to stripes.com and get reconnected with a legacy of news without the spin. Stripes.com. One winter night in 2002, I was laying in a cot somewhere in a Polish forest staring up at a star-filled sky. I was cold and miserable, one of those why am I here moments, and I noticed what I thought was a shooting star. Pretty cool for the moment, and I made a wish for Endex, the end of exercise that had brought us to nowhere, Poland. But then the star stopped. It just stopped. It began to slowly move in one direction, then quickly it darted off at an angle. It happened so fast that I wasn't sure at all of what I'd seen. I looked around to see if anyone had also seen what I saw, but nothing. Just me, a trailer full of stuff, and the snoring of Sleeping Joes. This is Military Matters. I'm Rod Rodriguez. I don't claim to have seen a UFO or a UAP. I just know that I don't know what that was. That answer has frustrated lots of our listeners. Facebookers have asked me what I thought of Luis Elizondo's statements. Did I think they were aliens? And I've responded that I don't know what to think because I'm not an expert in planes or aviation. But on the other hand, you don't need to be an expert to have an opinion. Any cable news is proof of that. What's my opinion? Well, we'll get to that later because I want to talk about what you all thought. The majority of our listeners that reached out to me on Facebook and Twitter feel like there's a lot more to this story than meets the eye. You've all directed me to a number of documentaries, UFO experts, and podcasts with guests who seem to have some inside track into what's happening in our skies. And I've listened and watched a few of them. Some were far more convincing than others, but it did make me think very hard about what Mr. Elizondo had said, or perhaps what he didn't say. The whole point of the last episode was to look at the UAP or UFO issue through the lens of a service member or the DoD. We had no intention of being sensational, but instead to think of UAP activity as what it is: unexplained aerial phenomena that's occurring over our airspace and within striking distance of our warfighters. There is one theory that many of you floated out to me that gave me cause to pause. The Anunnaki theory was cool too, but this one stood out to me because it seemed the most plausible explanation. That what we're seeing are our own aircraft, experimental craft so secretive that they don't release their flight plans to anyone. They go out, test, and return. One Facebook comment read, quote, "That took off from Area 51, and it's piloted by a DARPA guy, who, by the way, is getting a real kick out of fucking with that pilot," end quote. DARPA is the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. Okay, so maybe not aliens, maybe it's our own most advanced aerial technology, that there's a human at the stick of that tic-tac flying in and out of the ocean. Technology aside, that does seem the most sensible. Or does it?
So I worked at Lockheed Skunk Works. I had a 40-year career in defense aerospace, 33 of which was at Lockheed Martin Skunk Works.
That's Stephen Justice. He's the director of the Aerospace Division at To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science.
My job is to look at the information that's being collected. You see through Scout and Vault and these kind of programs to go out there and without bias, without judgment, collect materials, data, videos, whatever it is, work with it through this artificial intelligence system to determine what is, we'll say, truth as best we can tell, because a lot of stuff is faked or tainted or has no real chain of custody associated with it. So looking through and extracting whatever facts we can possibly find from that.
Stephen's experience places him in a category of expert that is hard to argue with. Lockheed Martin Skunk Works is where the latest technology in aviation is developed and tested. It's a very sensitive operation with government clearances, secrecy, and a history of being on the edge of defense capabilities.
I love technology breakthroughs and how do we transition these technologies that are just sitting on a workbench? How do we embody those into an aircraft that represents a transformational set of capabilities for the warfighters? Because as I brief civic groups, I say war is not a sport. I don't want a fair fight, I want a crushing win.
The U-2, the SR-71 Blackbird, and the F-117A Nighthawk are just a few of the publicly known aircraft that have come out of the elite division of Skunk Works. So when Steve says he wants to design aircraft that dominate the skies, I believe him. I was curious as to why an accomplished aerospace engineer would get wrapped up in such a controversial topic as UFOs or UAPs.
In the mid-90s, I became the unofficial historian for the Skunk Works. And so after my job, I did my job during the day, I would stick around for about an hour at night, pull out some papers from the historical files, and just look through them to see what I had to inventory things. And there was one paper I pulled out that was written by the guy that founded the Skunk Works, Kelly Johnson.
Kelly Johnson is a legend in the world of aerospace. Aviation Week and Space Technology ranked Johnson number 8 on its list of the 100 most important, most interesting, and most influential people in the first century of aerospace. He spent decades at Lockheed Martin on innovations seen even today.
And the title of the paper was Citing an Unidentified Flying Object by Certain Lockheed Personnel. And it was like, you gotta be kidding me. So I opened it up and it's a letter to a general at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base documenting this thing that he saw. And what really caught my attention was there was like 3 of his guys up in a Lockheed Constellation, they're flight test engineers, and they saw the same thing and couldn't explain it. And Kelly drew pictures of it and all this kind of stuff. And I leaned back in my chair and I go, you know what? These guys know what airplanes are. They know what swamp gas is. They know what clouds are. They couldn't explain this. It freaked them out. I'm going to put aside all this, who's behind the wheel, where it came from, and go, this means it can be done. Because sometimes the secret to breakthroughs is just knowing something can be done.
Steve just described a UAP sighting documented in the archives of one of the world's most advanced aerospace companies, witnessed by its own engineers. Like Steve said, these are guys that know what a plane is. But perhaps more importantly is Kelly Johnson, his concern over this topic so great that he archived this letter. Why would Kelly feel inclined to save this document if there was any doubt in his mind? Perhaps because there wasn't. Steve was nevertheless skeptical. Talking with him, I was impressed by how little he cared to talk about the what-ifs. What if they're aliens? What if they're from another dimension? What if they're hostile? Steve was more interested in the facts of what these craft had already demonstrated as their capabilities. After retiring from Lockheed Martin in 2016, Steve accepted an offer from Tom DeLonge to join the To the Stars Academy.
And I just held on to that perspective of, we've seen enough evidence that it can be done. Let's go figure out how to do it. And to be honest with you, in a lot of the big defense aerospace companies, they won't touch it with a 10-foot pole because of the stigma. So this represented an opportunity to go try.
We've all seen the black and white Navy footage, the gimbal video, the pilots chatter about what they're seeing. We even used a still from the video for our podcast episode cover. But Steve had a very rare opportunity to actually talk with one of the pilots of those videos, Commander David Fravor.
And I actually picked him up at Washington National Airport. We were going to head to a set of meetings.
So he tells Commander Fravor,
I just go, Dave, tell me the story.
so Commander Fravor does. He starts walking Steve through the infamous encounter. At one point, Steve asks how close did Fravor really get to this UAP, to which he responded,
He just goes, Steve, it went right across my nose. I mean, it was just a few wingspans away. I mean, I thought the way I remember it was he was almost going to hit it. And he goes, I was close enough to see the shape very clearly, no panel lines on it, no inlet, no exhaust, no wings, tails, and two small antennas, like UHF antennas, hanging out of the bottom of it. And it had a small crease around its middle with a shadow on it. I go, okay, well, that's pretty close.
So Steve is now hearing about another extraordinary incident from someone who also knows their planes. I want to hit the pause button here for a minute to address some folks that were presenting a variety of explanations for what was on the video captured by the Navy pilots. One person even wrote that it was a duck. This fighter jet was tracking a duck, and that its pilot couldn't tell the difference between a duck and another aircraft. Look, human beings are the weakest link of any chain of technology. Our eyes don't always convey the truth of what we're seeing. Our interpretation can be wrong, and subject matter experts can be wrong. But they can also be right. And the reason we call them subject matter experts is because they've put in the time and have acquired the experience to be right most of the time, which is the difference between an expert and a layperson. So Steve Justice talking to David Fravor is one expert talking to another about the same incident, and they both came to the same conclusion that they didn't know what it was. But I'll go out on a limb here and say that neither one of them thought that could be a duck, or any other aircraft or waterfowl. Steve knew, after talking with Commander Fravor himself, that there was something much more important happening here.
I was stepping into something that represented uncertainty and ambiguity and represented breakthroughs. As I said at the kickoff we did at To the Stars in October of 2017, revolutionary is actually too mild of a word here because it represents a change to so many different domains. When I look at this problem, there's actually three brains that I look at it with. One is the engineer. How do you do that? That's really interesting. I want to make a bird that flies like that. The second one is the academician in me. In order to do that, this fundamentally changes physics as we know it. And the last is the strategist inside. How do I exploit this to our nation's benefit, commercially as well as militarily? And if somebody else has it, should it have a bad guy symbol on the side of it? How do we defend against it? So those are the three brains that I look at it with. And like I say, it represents to me a huge breakthrough that's impacted in those three domains.
So I asked Steve, have you ever seen anything like this before? Now, I get he can't say, oh yeah, seen one of those when I was with Skunk Works. Okay, let's assume for a moment he had worked on exactly that tic-tac looking aircraft. Then it's all a ploy to keep us guessing, or he could go to work on 1,000 other things instead of dealing with this UFO UAP stuff. So again, I wanted to know if he'd seen anything even remotely like what we've seen in the footage. Has he been privy to any other evidence or videos?
You've basically seen everything that I've seen. There's no hidden information here, and that's one of the premises of To the Stars. The first was, quite honestly, the gimbal video, because they're up at about 25,000 feet, and this object is only doing about 100 knots. And so they're getting range finding on it. It's not like it's just flying away from them at some greater speed. It's traversing across. And typically for the airplanes I would design to do 100 knots at that altitude required pretty big wings. It's not a jet. You want to be up at several hundred miles per hour because the air density is starting to go down and wings aren't working so well. And so you really need some speed on you when you're at that altitude. So it was going slow. Now let's take the shape and everything out of it. It didn't appear to have wings, big wings on it. It just appeared to be a blob. And people can draw whatever judgments they want to have about the blob. The second thing that got me about the video was when it rotated 90 degrees to flight and decelerated almost to a stop. I just don't know of anything that does that. You can sit there and say, what was the glow around it? What was the shape? All those kinds of things. I'm going to withdraw judgment on this because there's just no facts inside of that. Facts are its speed, facts are its orientation, and change in speed. And I'll tell you, if you listen really closely to the pilots, they say on the ASA that there was another dozen of them out there. So it wasn't like this was the only one. So that's their situational awareness panel. There was a bunch of other ones up in the air there. And these guys were kind of, you can tell by the expletives, it was not something they saw every day.
So in terms of footage or aircraft, this was his breakdown of what he saw. He doesn't care about the glowing or who's flying it. He's looking at the facts of what the video presented. Speed, orientation, its trajectory. The unarguable facts behind the videos have left this aerospace engineer with decades of experience himself completely without an answer to what it is these Navy sensors recorded. But then he brings up something else, something I didn't know much about.
The piece of magnesium bismuth.
Steve had visited the laboratory of Dr. Hal Puthoff, co-founder of To the Stars and former DoD research scientist and physicist. There he was introduced to the magnesium bismuth.
When you look down on it, it's about an inch wide, about 3/4 of an inch high, and about less than 1/10 of an inch thick. But it's got like 80 layers in it of magnesium and bismuth. It looks like plywood on the edge. One surface appears to be tooled, so it has a very smooth surface to it. The other side is like it's been chipped off. It's broken off, the other flat side. But there's, as I recall, 80 layers inside there, and they're only mils thick of these two materials of magnesium and bismuth. When they first got their hands on it had been several years earlier, and that none of the material scientists knew how to build that material. That the two materials shouldn't stick together, and they had no idea what its purpose was. They could confirm its existence to 1996. People say it's allegedly dates back to the 1950s and was pulled off of a crash. We can't prove any of that. People wrote a lot of stuff down, but it wasn't notarized, wasn't certified, any of that kind of stuff. But we know it's been in someone's possession since 1996, and different experiments have been done on it, all to no avail. And so the question is, okay, if we don't know why these two materials be stuck together, if we didn't have the machines to build it, some of the experts said it had to be built in 0G, that it couldn't be built in the presence of gravity. It's almost, the manufacturing process appears to be almost assembling it atom by atom. And so, that's interesting to me.
Steve mentioned a study that suggested this material could be used in a way similar to the screen on the door of your microwave. It's that black mesh on the window that lets you see your food getting cooked but doesn't allow the microwaves to escape the door. It's because the holes in the mesh are too small for the microwaves to pass through it.
What this material essentially does is, if you were to make that screen out of this material, it would allow that energy to come through. It would be below cutoff. This is called the cutoff mechanism. The F-117's inlet grid works exactly the same way. It's those little boxes that don't let energy come in. This propagates energy when it shouldn't. And so that's interesting to me. And it could represent a breakthrough for radios and other things, other waveguide designs.
The jury is still out on what this piece of metal means, where it could have been made, and what it could be used for. But of course, being the person I am, I immediately wondered if this could be part of a weapon system. Could we be looking at the equivalent of a trigger, a barrel? I asked Steve if he thought that whatever was behind the technology could be a threat to our national security.
In every single encounter, and I said, you've seen everything, almost everything I've seen, okay? In every single encounter, who chases who? We chase them. Whatever it is, we chase them. Okay? So who's the threat there?
And he's right. We do chase them in military jets with weapons. To my knowledge, we haven't shot one down officially. If you know otherwise, hit me up on Twitter. But as far as I know, we haven't taken one down. I'm not entirely sure we can, but nevertheless, we do the chasing. There are some accounts that UAPs have been spotted near nuclear weapons hubs and missile silos right when there are shutdowns and power outages. Luis Elizondo briefly touched on this when he mentioned that there was some interest by these craft into our nuclear programs. But if anyone was going to pull the trigger first, my money is on us and the human race in general, if they are in fact aliens.
I'm not going to assign it to be a threat or anything else, because I have to be really careful. As soon as I pick up a hammer, I start looking for nails, and I'm just not going to do that.
Steve makes a great point here about mindset, ensuring that we're looking at this phenomena from more than just one or two angles.
So the first thing I would ask you to choose is a mindset of the impossible is just something you haven't seen yet. There is a propensity inside of our minds to automatically make it scary. We humans really love the comfort zone that we live in. And anytime we step out of it into a new job, or if you're not used to speaking in front of groups and you suddenly have to give a speech, fear comes in. And so the unknown, the anticipated, always in the lizard portion of our brain of fight or flight kind of thing, brings up this fear element. And I would encourage people to resist that. Let's wait until there's a reason, because right now we really I don't see a reason to fear anything. Not that I have much data, but like I say, usually it's us doing the chasing. So the mindset of, right now what we're seeing is impossible, but we just haven't gotten there technologically yet. Don't assign fear to it until there's a reason to. Let's look at it as opportunity. I was always taught throughout the course of my career that risk and opportunity are closely paired. So let's go into it and examine the risk, but let's also understand the opportunity. A nice balanced approach to this.
These last two episodes were a bit of a dream realized for me. Since I was a little kid watching The X-Files, watching Will Smith battle aliens in both a black suit and a flight suit, to the History Channel's endless Ancient Aliens and Aliens Decoded series, the idea that we weren't alone has fascinated me. But as a veteran and a service member, the idea of aliens takes on a different tone. I look back at Independence Day with a bit more anxiety than I did as a kid. We've lived through more than 15 years of war in the Middle East. I can tell you that the army I joined back in 2000 is not the same army my son joined recently. We've changed and evolved rapidly. Technology is more weaponized than it has ever been. We have new materials, new weapons, new aircraft, and yet, there's something out there that makes everything we have here look basic. Whatever it is that's flying around out there isn't a duck, and if it is, not a duck I want to meet. Luis Elizondo and Steve Justice bring compelling ideas to consider, not arguments, because if nothing else, they don't want to argue with you. They want to talk with you, to have an open discussion about what could be and what is. To say the world feels upside down right now is an understatement. Our political sphere is rife with distrust and anger, our country's racial tensions seem to grow every day, and the daily wear of masks reminds us of how absolutely fragile our lives really are. That a microscopic disease, whether it's COVID-19 or the Black Plague, that a virus could end us. I wonder what we all might think. If in the middle of our American plot of Republicans versus Democrats, white versus black, up versus down, that if in the middle of our storyline, we were interrupted by flying discs, and a message from their flyers were to scroll across our screens, that maybe we'd realize that the universe, time and space, are bigger and more different than we had ever imagined. That perhaps it's time for us as a human race to evolve, and to stop focusing on all the small things. I want to thank To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science for their tremendous assistance in making these last two episodes. You can find out more about To the Stars at home.tothestarsacademy.com. Special thanks to Luis Elizondo and Steve Justice for taking the time out of their busy schedules to talk with me. I want to express how much both Luis and Steve appreciate the military and their families. During our conversations, they both expressed admiration for our armed services, and both have deep personal and family connections to those in uniform and to those who've served. I would be remiss if I didn't pass along their message of gratitude. Folks, you've probably heard by now that Stars and Stripes is on the chopping block. They want to shut us down, September 30th. The President of the United States tweeted recently that he wasn't going to let that happen. Stars and Stripes has been there for our U.S. military through it all, thick and thin. You won't find any other newspaper brave enough to go where Stripes has gone. Nuclear submarine under yards of ice, Stars and Stripes is there. Lur's debt 4 days hump from the nearest outpost, Stars and Stripes is there. There's no compromise in our dedication to our service members, their families, and our veterans. And in case you thought this was only about them, well, guess what, America? Stars and Stripes is here for you too. There's only one way we're going to do this. You want to hashtag keep stripes. Share that hashtag. Let them know we won't be silenced. Hashtag keep stripes. This episode of Military Matters was written and produced by Rod Rodriguez, executive produced by Benjamin Bateman. Go to stripes.com and use promo code podcast. You'll save 50% on your digital subscription. 50% off. Just use promo code podcast. I'm Rod Rodriguez, and I'll see you at the next episode. Cheap Tickets wants to thank you for defending our country all over the world. Cheap Tickets wants to help you take a trip of your own. We believe the best trips in life are cheap. And as a proud supporter of the U.S. military, they want to offer you flights, hotels, car rentals, and even event tickets for less because you deserve it. Visit cheaptickets.com/military and take 18% off hotels. Offer is valid for active duty service members, veterans, military reserves, and the National Guard. Cheap Tickets thanks you for your service. cheaptickets.com/military.